So a very good evening to everyone. On behalf of all the students, faculty, and the staff at School of Management and Entrepreneurship, let me welcome you to the third session of Tech-MBA Masterclass, SME IIT Jodhpur. My name is Anuj, and I will be moderating today's session. Today we have with us Dr. Venkat Ram Reddy, who is an assistant professor in the area of human capital and organizational dynamics. Also, one of the most liked professors at SME within the area of HR. Today, he'll be speaking about a very pertinent topic, which I think everyone should be really keen to know more about. As I said, because it's very relevant in today's time, specifically with regards to the organization, which is matching algorithms for internal labor markets. Professor Dr. Venkat is a PhD from IIT Madras, and thank you so much, Dr. Venkat, for taking out time from your schedule and interact with our students. The virtual dais is all yours.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dr. Anuj. I hope I'm able to speak clearly and able to hear my voice. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining in today. Today, the agenda for the masterclass would be matching algorithms for internal labor markets. So I'll take you briefly through the concepts of matching algorithms. What are the different kinds of labor markets that are available there in the world around? And how do we use these matching algorithms for better and effective management of internal labor markets, right? So with that brief note, I'll start with sharing of my screen and the presentation, and then we'll discussion. Thank you. So as the title talk goes, matching algorithms for internal markets. Now the idea here is to try and understand how do organizations try and move around their employees within the organization across teams. Now we often hear about labor markets, even more we hear about markets as a philosophy. And we would have seen in our lives different kinds of markets, experienced them, and so on and so forth. For example, let's say the usual markets that we are part of, right? Something like purchasing vegetables in a close by mandi, right? And what is the kind of market that exists here is the set of agents who sell these vegetables and the set of agents who come into these markets and purchase those vegetables. And the mode of transaction often happens to be money, right? So this is one usual market that we are often part of. The second kind of market that we would have seen in the world around us is if we often go into urban centers in India, we often find people different localities trying to for employment. Right? These are often the daily wage laborers who are out there seeking employment in quote unquote what we refer to as the informal labor markets. So what they are looking out for is selling their labor at a daily wage that they can get in return to the employment that they find. Now, common to these two kinds of markets and many other markets that we are part of is this idea of wage or price, right? So there is money is the sole arbiter in a lot of markets that we engage in terms of our transactions on a day-to-day basis. But there are certain other kinds of markets that we often engage in that need not necessarily have the transactions there are made of money. Transactions of these markets are often made with arbiters that are beyond money. So for example, let's say, which is what we refer to technically as matching market, right? So the phrase matching markets is this idea that transactions that two agents take up in a particular setting are often not to do with the price as a mediator or wage as an arbiter or some kind of monetary transaction that is involved, but something which is non-monetary, right? So for example, let's say what we are engaging in right now is a lot of you who are here today are looking out for prospective MBA admissions. Right? So you want to be part of certain colleges in India and pursue professions. Look at this, whatever we are trying to do right now as a set of students trying to look out for MBA, prospective MBA colleges. Often we know that even if we have money with us, entering into an IIT or IIM is not that easy, right? So you can't buy a seat per se in any of the institutions in India and around. does not really matter for us to get into any of these institutions. There's something else that needs to be there for us to get into these institutions, and often that is perhaps what we refer to as merit, right? So merit as a medium of transaction helps us match ourselves with the institutions that we would want to be part of, right? Similar other matching markets that we often engage with is, let's say, the organizations that we work for, right? So once you get into an organization and start working for an organization, especially in certain kinds of job roles that we engage in, let's say post your MBA, where you are all highly skilled professionals, often the job roles that you look at, that you want to be part of, that you want to move from one job role to the other, one organization to the other, need not always be because of the wage differential, right? So highly skilled workforce is often known to move from one job to the other or switch organizations based on certain non-monetary incentives. So often the decisions of careers for highly skilled workforce has nothing to do with perhaps less to do with the monetary terms than often it is to do with the non-monetary incentives that people can avail from different roles and different kinds of organizations. Let's say somebody wants to be independent and not have authoritative manager. So that could be one reason why the person wants to move from one role to the other or one organization to the other. So non like job flexibility, career progression, and so on and so forth also determine our movements across different job roles, across different organizations. So in this context, we are going to today talk about how matching markets evolve within an organization, especially a large scale, highly technical organization with a highly skilled workforce. How do they try and manage their preferences in terms of moving from one job role to the other? And as you said, why is this very important for highly skilled workforce in the companies that we would refer to is often to do with the fact that motivation for them is not really to do with money, but the kinds of jobs and tasks that they do on the job, right? So that becomes a crucial determinant of their engagement with the organization and their performance and eventual success of the organization. So for today's session, we will take the case of Google, right? So Google is a common household name for all of us. We use on a day-to-day basis most of our digital lives in some ways or the other. We owe it as in with vast array of products and services. We know that Google has, in some sense, conquered the digital world. Now, if you look at most of us, Google started out as a campus-based startup in 1995 at Stanford University, eventually to incorporate itself in 1998. And if you look at the core of Google, even today, is this idea of relentless search for answers. It's not just the search engine, it's the kinds of questions they ask, as often their employees are called. They look out for interesting questions, try and answer them, and build and answers that they come about. And this organization, with 2 people as a set of graduate students at Stanford, is now close to 1.5 lakh Googlers, as we refer to the employees of Google. And often Google is sought after for most skilled workforce in the globe, for not only for the monetary benefits that Google offers to its employees, but also the non-monetary benefits that we often hear about. Right? So the canteens, the perks that Googlers get is often given a lot of advertising in the popular media. Right? So that draws in a lot of highly skilled workforce to work for Google. And this is one of the reasons why Google is perhaps one of the best places to work around the globe. Now, knowing all of this about Google and what it does, what Google internally does on a daily basis to try and improve its people operations. What they call as people ops is largely about the typical HR function in different other organizations. Look at the employees up to, how are they doing, what is there any issue that they're facing in, is there anything that the organization could do to engage them better, improve their performance, and so on and so forth. All of it, which is a typical HR function. Now, somebody hit up on an interesting problem. Now, by virtue of this organization recruiting some of the highly skilled workforce, they often find it challenging to keep the highly skilled workforce motivated. And an internal survey of the organization sort of concluded that one of the main factors, apart from a lot of other usual factors such as money, compensation, salary, extra compensation benefits, and so on and so forth, one of the important factors that came about for Google is that their workforce is looking out for opportunities to move within the organization. So most of them consider very important because they want to move from one team to the other on a frequent basis to try and learn in different aspects of Google's products and services that Google is trying to build over time. Because this is something that most of the highly skilled workforce at Google believes adds to their job flexibility, their career progression, and so on and so forth. So the question that the people operations group at Google had was to how to enable this idea of role flexibility within Google in the next few years. So the project started in 19 by Chameleon, which is largely to indicate the idea that Chameleon, as how it frequently changes its colors, can Googlers over time change the job roles within the organization. So that is where Google and its case of matching markets sort of is the context that we are looking at as to how did Google go about studying this problem. How did Google go about laying out the context in which employees can choose to be part of different teams within the organization, and what are some well-established strategies that exist in theory and in practice in HR which help govern this process, and did Google use those existing processes or did Google do something very different, right? So moving on, going back to the presentation, right? So that's something that again I pictorially represented here. That for most of the Googlers, what matters is perhaps not the money, but let's say non-monetary incentives, job flexibility, career progression, learning on the job, and so on and so forth. And this is something that Google has been invested with, has experimented with to create internal labor market, where the internal labor market consists of two kinds of agents, right? So one is the set of managers handling different teams within the organization, and the other is the set of employees who work for these teams and who want to move from one team to the other, right? So just like how a labor market functions in the world around, where there are employers trying to give jobs to people looking out for labor, and there are employees or prospective employees who are trying to get into those jobs to fend for themselves, to give in the labor and in return expect a wage. So in some sense, what Google is looking at is the case of an internal labor market. Now, how do we move Googlers around was the question that most of the people ops folks had it in around 2018. So they went back to HR functioning and looked at the typical theories around and strategies around how people are moved within the organizations. So this is the summary of the set of strategies that exist in theory and in practice within the broad domain of human resources. So I'll briefly take you through the 5 of them and their trade-offs on scale, fairness, and price as a set of criteria, right? So one typical way in which any organization can move its human resources is by appointing a central staffing manager. Now, so what is the central who are coming in, who go to different parts of the city, and there's where there's a traffic cop who is in some sense they sort of directing this movement from one place to the other. So one of the strategies, apart from using centralized staffing manager, is this idea of beach teams. Now the idea of beach teams is having bench workforce within the organization to see that this workforce sort of offsets different teams within the organization as and when the teams require additional workforce, right? So this is one of the strategies that often organizations use. Now, if you look at it from the standpoint of fairness and choice, again, the scale fairness or choice is achieved by using bench workforce. And the other issue with having bench workforce is paying up someone for not doing any work and idle resources at the cost of. So often, again, this as a solution did not really sound good for the Google's people operations team. Then they looked at a couple of other strategies like evangelizing mobility, try and convince Googlers that why they should be moving from one team to the other instead of sticking to a particular team. This often, in some ways, is trying to satisfy the idea of choice because it is trying to encourage people to move from one place to the other within the organization. Also, it's because the individual, at the end of the day, the individual employee has the choice with him or her. But again, the scale is an issue in terms of what if 1 lakh people listen to my message and then tomorrow decide to move within the organization? Can I sort of help them move? Again, is a question of scale that often this kind of a strategy takes a hit on. Then the couple of typical strategies these days the HR functions use is what we refer to as job rotation or rotation program. Now, the idea of rotation program is to do with moving one person from one job periodically to different other jobs within the organization. But the catch here is that there is no choice involved. This is by definition an employee entering into Google has to move through different set of teams, but who determines this movement is often not the employee. It is the staffing manager. So rotation program work in terms of scale, but often hits the ground again on fairness and choice. Now, knowing Google as a high-tech company, which often lives, eats, and breathes algorithms, one suggestion that has come about is to try and use machine learning algorithms to try and navigate this process of moving Googlers from one team to the other. Now, one of the aspects of using machine learning or any kind of computation techniques to sort of build this ecosystem is the scale can be achieved, right? So you can run an algorithm, computationally feasible one, which can move 100 lakh people or 1 lakh people around within a day's time, right? But does this allow for fairness and choice? Again, is a question that Googlers hit upon. Now, how does machine learning algorithms sort of fit on this issue of fairness and choice is simply to do with the fact that for any machine learning algorithm, you need to feed in certain data points, right? So in some sense, you're turning employees of Google into mere data points on skill set, IQ or IQ or general ability test, whatever is the data point that you're looking out for that can define that individual, and then throwing it into the algorithm to learn itself and to push people around. So the scale is achieved using a machine learning algorithm. The issue there Google's face is on fairness and choice. So we have looked at this broad set of strategies. Google has gone through extensive research to understand how different strategies can be used, what are the issues thereof. And this is sort of a summary of those strategies. And as we could see, again from the table, that none of these strategies meet the 3 criterion that Google wants its employees to look at, which is scale, fairness, and choice. So Google has been on the lookout for this ideal solution for it to move people around within its organization, which could satisfy all the 3 aspects of scale, fairness, and choice. While fairness and choice is more for the employees to engage with the organization, the scale is for the organization itself to cut its costs on doing such a mammoth exercise. So that's where Google ended up with looking at the economics of matching markets. Now, as I introduced to you in the first instance, matching markets is a field within economics which tries to study how centralized markets operate at scale and at the same time achieve fairness and choice. And as by definition, they're not only centralized markets, but also the mode of transaction is not money. Right? So the mode of transaction, there is an extensive work in the field of mechanism design and the related aspects of matching markets on how to sort of design such a system where you have agents interacting with each other, but they are not interacting for a monetary transaction, but for a non-monetary transaction, and they are looking out for a centralized solution. Right? The work here brings us to what we refer to as matching markets and the field of market design. Now, as I said, the economics of market design is largely to do with designing economic institutions or markets in a centralized setup. Now, the core of matching markets is this idea of Gale-Shapley deferred acceptance algorithm. Now, Gale-Shapley algorithm is the work that Gale and Shapley have done back in 70s, which has won them a Nobel Prize for their work on. They looked at this algorithm primarily from the standpoint of stable marriages. For them, the issue was not about moving people from one organization to the other, but they were looking at what could predict, what kind of an algorithm could predict a stable marriage. When you have two people mating, how do you see that that mating becomes stable and in the long run a successful one? So when you have a group of men and group of women interacting with each other, is there a way to allocate the matches between the men and women that can sort of stabilize the marriage, right? And that's the genesis of matching markets, matching algorithms, which eventually led to this entire field of market design, or what we call as mechanism design. Now, some of the users, real world users of mechanism design, or the idea of market design, especially with Gale-Shapley algorithm beyond stable marriages, is this idea of matching students to schools or universities. So again, as I said in the beginning, how do you look at a matching market of MBA admissions, right? So what kind of criterion should you use? And there are two kinds of agents there, and how do you design an algorithm where this market is stable and neither the students nor the universities are disappointed with the outcomes? And similar such examples as listed here. So what I'll do briefly now is to actually take you to a simulation of some kind using an Autodot tool, and then we come back and look at the nuances of this algorithm. Right. So what I'll do for the next few minutes is to try and see through this. Let's first suppose we have two groups of individuals. One is the set called employees, and the other is the set called managers. Right? Let's say Google has about 5 employees with them, right? For computationally, at least for pictorially representing it, we reduce the 1,50,000 to about 5 employees that Google has who are looking to move from one group, one team to the other, right? So let's take this employees as A, B, C, D, and E, right? Let's say on the side, there is a counterpart for each of these, which is 5 managers numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. For this part of the discussion, challenge is we have in front of us. Think of us as working for Google's people operations management team, and let's say we have 5 employees and 5 different managers, each one looking to be part of somebody's team, right? So the employees here, A, B, C, E, are looking to move to different set of managers on the other side, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So the first standpoint of matching any of the Gale-Shapley deferred acceptance algorithm is to try and ask this question, whether the employees A, B, C, E have a want to be part of. Let's say you ask this employee 1 as to what managers that this employee wants to be part of or work with, in some sense, managers or their teams, and is there a preference order there? Let's say we ask employee A, and the employee A says that, look, my first preference to move and work with right now is this manager 3, and then my next preference is right. So this is we are allocating it right now randomly, but this is a fixed preference that employee A has. So when he is asked to rate the 5 managers in terms of the order of preference on whom they would want, with whom they would want to work with, employee A said that I would want to work, if given an opportunity, my first preference would be to work with manager 3, and then 4 and 5 and 2, and the least preferred for me is manager 1. Now let's say we ask the same with this employee, right? So let's say the employee B gives us again a random fixed ordering here of these five managers on this side, right? So for the employee B, the most preferred manager that the employee would want to work with is 5, and the preferred is 4. We go on to map these preferences for the rest of the employees as well. So let me 5, 2, 1. I would want anyone else to come in and chip in with random set of preferences here. That would be also great. Any participant who would want to give a preference ordering for employee D amongst the 5. Employee D, who would be the most preferred manager? Let me and say it. Okay, for employee D, it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's say that's the fixed preference that employee D has. Now, for employee E, could be 3, 2, 5. This is something that I've just done out of my thinking, right? So this is random, but the assumption is that this is the fixed preference that employee A has, right? And similarly, now we move to the manager side, right? So now we also want to know from the manager's perspective, who are all the employees that the manager would want to work with and in what preference. Let's say I ask manager 1, can you give me a preference order of all the employees that are available to move to your team? And these are the 5 employees, A, C, D, and E. Now, can you give me a preference order? Say the manager gives a preference order which goes like this. He wants the most preferred employee for manager 1 is B, and the least preferred is E. So let me fill up for the other managers as well. So now we have a ground set for us to go about trying to match employees and managers, right? So we have on one side employees, 5 employees of Google with fixed preferences on which teams or managers they want to work with. And on the other side, we have 5 managers of these teams who have fixed preferences on who those employees they would like to work with, right? Now, this is in some sense the structure of the labor market within Google, right? So which is largely what internal labor market represents. That which is sitting here is to try and come up with a system which will address these preferences in the most possible, in the most fair fashion that can get. Because any mismatch in terms of putting employees to different managers or managers to least preferred employees often gets in the organization into trouble. Maybe the employees might leave the organization, or maybe the managers might complain that their teams might not really work well if this particular person comes to work with me, right? So this is often a challenge that an organization or a HR function often faces within the organization, right? So people keep complaining about each other in terms of how there is no match between the manager and the employee. And this often results in a lot of turnover. In fact, even before turnover, a lot of impact on employee performance, eventually leading to, let's say, employees quitting the job or managing teams and so on and so forth. Right? So this is in sense at the core of people operations is all about at Google. Now the solution that they have is, as we said, they have used this Gale-Shapley algorithm to try and address this problem. So the first step in the Gale-Shapley different deferred acceptance algorithm, which we'll henceforth refer to as DA, is to first have these rank order of preferences. Right? So we have done the first step of the algorithm. Now the second step of this algorithm is to have a set of proposals. So we'll have to have one set of people proposing to the other set. So in this case, what Google did was it gave the start to the employees. Ask the employees, why don't you propose who are all the managers that you would want to work with in the order of preference? So the employee goes one by one, right? So the employee says, look, A would say that I would want to work with 3. So then we move to the manager 3, right? So this is the third step of the algorithm. A says, look, my preferred manager is 3. The algorithm eventually takes us to 3 and looks at if he is already assigned an employee here. That none of these D, C, B, A are assigned, right? So this is the first step in which the first round of this algorithm, the employee is asked to propose whom they would want to work with. So we start off with employee A. Employee A says 3 is the manager number. Manager 3 is whom I would want to work with. Let's say we look at the other preferences too, right? Next is B. B says I would want to work with 5. C wants to work with 3. And D wants to work with 1. And E wants to work with the, the, the manager 4. Right? So this is the first preference ordering of these employees. These are the most preferred managers. Now we go on to the manager side and ask managers, look, we have got the preference ordering from these employees. Can you tell us whether you want to accept this employee? So let's say we go to the manager 3. We start with employee A. Employee A says that I want to work with manager 3. So we go to manager 3 and ask manager 3, would you want to work with this employee A here? Now the manager 3 here looks at and says, look, there's nobody else that I have agreed to. There's nobody else who has proposed to me. So there's nobody else I've agreed to. So I'm fine with taking A as of now. Right? So manager 3 takes employee A. So then we move to the second employee, right? So this is done. Manager 3 has accepted employee A as the member of the team. So then we move to the second employee, which is B. Now employee B says that he wants to work with this manager 5. Anuj, any questions?
You may continue, Venkat. No questions as of now.
Okay. Yeah. So we move to the next employee, which is employee B, and says, "Look, I this manager 5." So let's come to manager 5. Again, manager 5 is asked, "Look, employee B wants to work with you. Do you agree or do you accept to this proposition?" The manager 5 says, "Look, out of these 5, I'm not engaged with anyone. I've not accepted anybody's proposal, so I'm fine with going with B." So the manager 5 gets employee B. Now we move to the next employee, which is C. Now C says, I would want to work with manager 3. Okay. Now we know we come to manager 3 here. And manager 3, as we know, has already been assigned to employee A. Employee A has already been assigned to manager 3 because that was the first proposition that was made. And 3 said, look, I don't have anybody else who has made this proposition, so I'll accept A. But now there is conflict, right? So C wants to work with 3, and for 3, C is actually more preferred than A. Now what does 3 do? Would he reject this proposal or would he accept the proposal? So we come back to this manager 3 and ask him, look, there is some other proposition that has come your way. Apart from A, now C is saying that with you. Now, but you have already accepted A. So would you want to jilt this or throw away this relationship with A and move to the better option, which is C? What do you think the manager should say? Should he move to C or should he stick with A? Is the question.
So, Venkat, there are multiple responses. I'll just very quickly read out.
Yeah, I can see now. Yes, thanks, Anuj. Yeah. So accept to go with C, accept C, replace with A. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Right. So now the solution here, which the DA algorithm proposes, is if there is a proposition on the other side, which is on the acceptor side, which is better than the previous proposition, even if it has been accepted, now can be thrown away. So what it means is, from the algorithm standpoint, 3 will throw out A and accept C. Right? 3 will do. He will work with A. He'll come back to better possible. Right? So this is. So then we come to D. Now D says I would want to work with a manager 1. So we come to manager 1 and ask, look, there's a proposition for you. Would you want to accept it? And 1 would say, look, nobody has proposed to me till now, so I will take whatever comes my way. So D is fine with manager 1. So this to the last employee, which is E, and we ask E, the most preferred one. The E would say that I would want to work with manager 4. So we come to the manager 4 and we'll ask, is there anybody else that would you like to accept E as your proposition? Then manager 4 would say, I don't have anybody here, so I'd rather take whatever comes my way. Right? So this is in some sense how the algorithm works, right? So this is the first round of the algorithm where we look at all of these combinations and we look at whether there is a match there or not, right? In some sense, we have actually jumped this. C moved to 3. This is fine, and D1 and E4, right? So this it now leaves us with this manager 2, right? So manager 2 does not get any employee in this round. Now, is there a necessity for the second round? Right? So do you think, is there a necessity for moving beyond the first preferences and going to the second round of preferences? Any quick thoughts on that? This allocation, we've seen that manager 2 does not have any employee here. Now the question is, should we stop with this allocation? Should we move to next round of allocation, and will this be possible? Right? So that's where the question is right now. Any thoughts on what should be done? Or do you think this is more or less like with this combination? Give A to manager 2. Okay, this is one thought. Let me just write it down. So one manager 2 should be given A. Okay, go to the second round. Okay, right. Okay, so if I believe who Ajinkya is the one who said, sorry, not Kaustav is the one who said, give A to manager 2, right? So A to manager 2, has A already been assigned? Kaustav, any thoughts on that? No, right? So A is free now. Is that why you want to move him to manager 2? Now, that's not how the algorithm works, right? So what the algorithm says is that once you have a stable set with you, and once there is no reason for anybody to move, and there's no reason for anybody to reject anyone on this side. So there's no reason now for the managers to reject anyone because there are no proposals as such, because everyone in some sense has been mapped. Is that the case, or is there somebody who has not been mapped? From the anyone who is not, and from the manager side, is there anyone who is not being mapped? Is the question. Yeah, okay. The only employee who is not being mapped is A, right? Now we need to move to the next round because A has not got any manager to work with. So what A did was propose to 3. It was accepted by manager 3, but it was rejected because C proposed to manager 3 and C was more preferred. So now the option that we have is A can propose to the next best, which is 4. Okay, in the second round of this loop, what will happen is A will propose to the next best preference, which is manager 4. So we go to manager 4 here and ask manager 4, look, in the previous round, we have allocated to E, the employee. Would you want to stay with this employee E, or would you want to take up this from employee A? Now manager 4 would say, look, fine, I have accepted this employee in the previous round, but A is a better off choice for me, right? It goes E of the box because manager 4 has a better proposal, so A is now there. Now that with another problem, right? What is that problem? Is no longer E is with 4, right? So this is everybody else, right? So B with 5 C3 and D1 is fine. Now A is with 4. By virtue of A being with 4, E cannot be with 4. So in the third round, what we do is move to E's next best option, which is to say 3. So we go to cycle 3 here, right? And we ask the manager 3 in round 3 as to whether you want to go ahead with E because you already have C and you have rejected in the first round A. Now you've got a better off option C. Now somebody else is coming and proposing it to you, right? Which is E. Now 3 will say, yes, I'm still take it because E is better than C on any given day for me, right? Which means C has no option, right? So this goes. So C has to move to the next preference, which is 4. Now we'll go to the fourth round. In C said, I want to be with 4. We go and ask manager 4, would you want to stay with A or would you want to move to C? Manager 4 would say, why not? Because C is my most preferred option. So I'll throw out A as well. The fifth round, right? And we'll end it there. The loop can continue in terms of the number of employee preferences. Right? Now A is again left here, right? So 3 rejected him, 4 again rejected him. Now his next best option is to be with 5. Now we come here and ask 5, would you want to stay with B or would you want to stick to this new proposition that is being made by A? And 5 would say, throw out this guy because he's not preferred as much as A is. Now that leaves us at the round 6, we have B again, the employee B, who is left without a manager. And the loop continues until there is a point where there is no question of anybody left out on the employee side. Right? So where the algorithm terminates in this loop is when you have a set or when you have a matching set where there's nobody on this side who is left off, because the moment somebody is left off here, there's a possibility of rejection somewhere here. Right? So this is how the Gale Shapley algorithm progresses, and this is computationally feasible depending on the number of employees, the number of managers, and the set of preferences that they have. And the phrase that is used to define the density of this market in terms of number of employees and number of managers is what we refer to as thickness. Right? So thickness of a labor market, in this internal labor market, is the number of employees that are out there looking to managers and the number of managers who are looking to take in new employees for those teams. So the thickness of the market determines how computationally feasible this algorithm is. By and large, as has already been proved in many other contexts like college admissions, kidney transplantations, and so on and so forth, where this has led to a stable solution. Right? And what is a stable solution in this case? Right? What is a stable solution where the algorithm terminates is something like this. Right? So let me just move back to the screen, and that's where we'll come to the conclusion of this talk. So solution for markets algorithms like the DA algorithm is this one. Right? So why does it work is, if an individual contributor prefers a manager to his current matching, then the individual current contributor must have already proposed to the manager. Right? So, which means if he's preferring a manager right now, which means he's already done that in the past. And likewise, the manager would have already rejected that offer too. Right? So when does the loop terminate is in a condition where this sort of happens as you move into the loops of the algorithm, right? And at the end of it, you'll have a stable set of match between employees and the managers, which what we refer to as a matching market solution in this case of internal labor markets. So this is something that they have implemented for one vertical of their organization, which is what we refer to as tech in Google, which sort of houses their tech strategists within the organization. So Google has experimented with this algorithm in terms of organization and moving people within the organization across different teams. And as we discussed through the talk, some of the factors that are necessary for this algorithm to work is one, the thickness of the market. If there are only 2 employees and 2 managers, then it's not a problem to solve that, right? But if there are 100,000 employees and maybe 1,000, that's a hard, right? So there's a delta at which the hypothetical reference point at which the thickness of this mechanism is determined. And as long as that thickness exists, the algorithm can work. Any lesser number of matching pairs, the algorithm need not be run. A stable solution can be found very soon, right? The other for us to run this in an internal labor market setup is to actually come up with that preference ranking, right? So when you ask employees whom do they want to work with, it's often a function of many things, right? So it could be the team's composition, be the manager's traits, and so on and so forth, right? So do you have a way to standardize employees' preferences, right? So is there a set of questions that Google's people management team asks all the employees to come to that ranking of managers, right? So that's again a challenge that Google faced in the first time around when it started experimenting with using the D algorithm. Because by definition, the algorithm requires you to have a stable preference before you enter into the management process, right? And third challenge that Google had when launching this project was to look at to what extent can it experiment, right? So what kind of rules can it dole out? Because any issues with the algorithm, the matching that it concludes with, how do you sort of handle it without taking a hit in terms of business? So that's again a challenge that Google had, right? But largely they've been by far successful. Project Chameleon, as it's called, and you can go back and refer to the web to study about this, is largely it has been successful in terms of moving people to different managers whom they prefer, and likewise managers getting the employees that they prefer. So in some sense, it has resulted in the short-run implications of improved prioritization, enhanced engagement, and knowledge transfer. The moment you move people within the organization to different teams at a regular interval, you have a very well-connected organization with a more distributed knowledge. Now, seeing the success, Google has decided to run this Chameleon as an organization-wide project, and it is still an ongoing effort on their part, where they are trying to see how best can they achieve results using such matching process. So the long-run potential of using such matching algorithms to move people around within the organization is to have a workforce with interchangeable skills and have a workforce that is better integrated with organization goals. Once you work with n number of teams within the organization, you are the organization in some sense, right? So that is what Google is trying to attempt, and that I will close my talk right now and request you to look into any questions, and I'll be happy to answer. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Venkat. I think it was a very enriching session. We have a couple of questions, and if you refer to the chat box, I think you'll find few. Somehow we just missed out on one question, so I thought I'll just go to that question first. So there is a question by Srijan Garg, and please tell me if I'm able to pronounce your name correctly, Srijan. And what Srijan says is, how do managers know whether an employee is worth having in a specific team?
Right, so this is Srijan, thanks for that question. The hygiene factors that I was talking about, which is about organization of job roles, right? So how does an organization arrive at a set of criteria which the employees can use to evaluate managers and managers can evaluate the employees? So are there a standard set of criteria that Google needs to dole out to all of its employees and managers so that they come up with a uniform ranking? So the scale is the same for all the employees to rank all the managers. And that is something of a groundwork that is being done on the count before doling out this algorithm. Because otherwise, any randomness there or any leaving it open for the employees to rank their managers on different set of criterion often leads to a lot of issues, right? So the rationalization of job roles, thereby the preferences that managers can come to, is a precondition for the algorithm, right? So, and that is the groundwork that Google has done before building out the algorithm.
More exhausting yourself. Don't do it.
Yeah. So, okay, what a manager and an employee two preference at one position and whom to select as a preference, right? So that's why we say it's a fixed order preference, right? So you can't have two people in the same ranking, and that's again a condition where you're forcing people to come up with rank order, right? So you can't have, say, two people having the first preference, right? So that's again not what we are looking at the use of this algorithm, right? And the reason there is again to do with not so much fitting your preferences to the algorithm, but by virtue of rank order, you cannot have any combination there. Yeah, thanks.
All right, if there are any more questions, all right. So Venkat, there's a question.
Rajesh is asking the same question on the thickness of it. So, have, let's say, a set of three people, and if the size of the set is only three, then I think you don't need this algorithm, right? So you can come up with that in some ways. But when you have anything beyond five, I think it works. But that's just in terms of the feasibility on a piece of paper, right? So you can still run this algorithm beyond five as well. But I would say anything less than four, it is computationally feasible to do this even without the algorithm. So, but there is no such number that I can give you as a ratio, right? But then there needs to be some thickness, which is some set of preferences and some set of employees there. Now, how much is some can be anything beyond. Anything less still come with a statement, but you don't need the algorithm to do that. Yeah. So Avinash, where if you have only few preferences, right? So by logic, that's what rank ordering is, right? So if I only want to work with two managers, I'm forcing you to tell me that the next three managers are not preferred, and you have to rank order them in some fashion, but they come beyond after these two people. So if you only have two people whom you want to work with, the rest is in the lower order, right? So they come in as 3, 4, 5 in some fashion. For any of these algorithms is what we refer to as strategy, proof, and stability. Right? So strategy, proof, and stability are criterion that we often use in game theory to look at the solutions and see which of them are stable solutions. Right? So the assessment of these solutions is slightly different from what you will do in typical quality management setting, where you're more concerned about error and frequency of error and so on and so forth. So that's not what the game theoretic approach to matching markets is slightly different in terms of the evaluation. So you get into more nuanced criterion of fairness and choice, right? Not so much on error front. So that's all I have for now. Anuj, I can take any more questions if people have. Otherwise, I would give it to you.
Let me just take a look at it once. I think you've answered almost all the questions, Venkat. What I would request everyone is, even if there are any question which is, which has not been answered because of we have to also factor in the time constraints, I sincerely request everyone to type in your question or just mail it to us. Abhishek, if you could just type in the email ID of the admissions team so that in case anyone has any questions, feel free to send your questions to the mentioned email ID, and rest assured someone from our team will get back to you. Thank you so much, Dr. Venkat. Thank you so much for taking your time and interact with the students. And there you go, guys. Abhishek, Dr. Abhishek has typed in the email ID, which is admissions_SME@IIT.jo.ac.in. In case anyone has any questions, feel free to drop in your queries. And as I said, we will be more than happy to revert back. Thank you so much again, Dr. Venkat, and to all the students who have joined in. Stay tuned. The next session that we have is scheduled for tomorrow, which is again on the dual degree, and the next masterclass is scheduled for the 20th. You will receive all the emails in your email mailbox. Kindly stay tuned to all the social media handles and your email ID. Once again, thank you so much, everyone. Have a very good evening.